Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Glad to have the opportunity to be here and always enjoy this conference. Congratulations to any of you in the room that are part of putting it together. My presentation this morning is going to be sort of a review and an update on where we are with some of the watermelon fertilizer situations in Florida. I think that just say up front that you probably have a lot less pressure on you in Georgia than we do in Florida for some of this. And so the perspective of what I'm going to be doing is sort of based on this current situation that we have in Florida. To some degree, our growers are already under some type of a regulatory overview, and every 2 years they get the opportunity to meet with somebody from the state and provide fertilizer records. So that's just a sort of a peek into the seriousness of the matter in our region. We've got nitrogen is the primary nutrient of concern in our region, and we've got a pretty stiff load reduction that we have to accomplish in our region, and that number currently is about almost 6 million pounds of nitrogen that has to be reduced in that Swanee Valley region alone. So with that as a little bit of a background, the current recommendations for drip irrigated watermelons, which is essentially all of the watermelons in the region where I am, are going to be drip irrigated plastic mulch, very similar production systems in that regard. Some of the basic stuff, soil test and lime requirements. We can put phosphorus and micronutrients in the bed and not have to worry too much about leaching the majority of them. And then our current recommendation is to, if you're using conventional fertilizer, about a third of the nitrogen and a third of the potassium could be applied in the bed, and the remainder would be fertigated on a certain schedule and with the help of tissue analysis to kind of fine-tune that as we go through the season. The current University of Florida recommendation for nitrogen is 150 pounds per acre. You can go higher than that if you have documentation of either a leaching rain event, or if the leaf tissue analysis that you have shows a deficiency, then a grower could have supplemental applications and actually go above the 150 pounds and still be within the regulatory requirements that the state imposes. So that's sort of where we are, what we're trying to do in terms of meeting the target. I would say that we're in pretty good shape because we've got plastic and drip. We can use technology there to help us. Soil moisture sensors are really important to help us during the majority of the season. However, there is one part of the season where we're still vulnerable, and that is the early season bed fertilizer. So over the years that I've been working with these growers, there's been a significant reduction in bed fertilizer over the past couple of decades anyway. But this is the area, if there is a sufficient amount of nitrogen fertilizer, 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds in the bed, that's the part that's going to be really, really difficult to meet that 150 pound requirement in our deep sandy soils. I just remind you that these are very sandy soil situations. So if you're growing watermelons on some heavier soils, a lot of this will not be quite as compelling as it is in our deep sandy soils in Florida. 1% organic matter, in some cases less than that. So that's the challenge, and most of my work here is going to be focused on what we've been doing in the last 4, 5, 6 years to try to figure out how we can make some adjustments to this very vulnerable early season part of our fertilization program. If there's one slide in all of what I'm going to do that hopefully will be in your mind, is this slide. And this is some soil moisture sensor information. This is the actual VIC part where we're measuring the electrical conductivity in that bed, which is a sort of an indirect measurement of what's going on with the fertilizer there. It doesn't tell us how much of that's nitrogen or how much of that's potassium. However, it does. It does. I just want to make sure I don't. So if you take a look at this, there's a trend in these lines. There's a bunch of them that are all of a sudden decreasing, and there's one line that is going up. And so this one line that's going up is the sensor at our 20-inch level. So if you imagine that over here we have put our bed fertilizer out, and we're beginning to start irrigations. We're getting the irrigation systems hooked up. We're not even planting yet. So all of this is happening in about a 2-week period on this particular farm before the planting even occurs. So the fertilizer's applied, we're getting everything set up, and we start irrigating. And then if you'll notice that this first line begins to drop pretty quickly, almost immediately, and that's the top sensor at 4 inches. The next sensor at 8 inches begins to drop within another day or so, and so forth on these top 4 sensors down to 16 inches. So this brown one here is the 16-inch sensor. The 20-inch sensor is this blue one that kind of has a different trajectory. So what's happening here is that bed fertilizer is being moved. And in this case, it's all being moved from everything except the 20-inch level. So the 20-inch level is actually increasing. So all the bed fertilizer that we hope and think that is available to us up in that transplant area, and let's say even the top 6 inches, it's not there. It's already begun to move. So the more bed fertilizer we put out and the more we irrigate, the riskier this problem is gonna be. And so if you lose a lot of this fertilizer and you're depending on 50 pounds of that to be available for your 150-pound nitrogen rate, it's not gonna happen because you've lost it in this 20-inch depth is the deepest sensor in this particular situation. I'd be willing to guarantee you that a lot of this is down deeper than 20 inches, and we haven't even planted yet. So this is what is driving us to try to look at things a little differently. That is the most sensitive time of the year, that bed fertilizer, conventional soluble fertilizer. What can we do about that and meet our best management practice options? Number one is that we can reduce the bed fertilizer, the nitrogen and potassium. Those are the two that are most vulnerable to leaching. That's option number one. I think we're already seeing a lot of progress where folks maybe used to use 75 or 100 pounds of it and only use 50 pounds through the fertigations. And by default, if you lose that early season fertilizer, you're going to end up at 200 pounds instead of 150 pounds. But anyway, so there is some reduction that is being done there in the bed fertilizer. The second one would be to look at some of the newer technology with the polymer-coated fertilizers, controlled release forms, especially controlled release forms of nitrogen and potassium, the two that we're concerned about in the bed. And then the third option would be to look at implementing a longer season all liquid fertigation program. I certainly realize that number 2 and number 3 get into your pockets pretty quick and pretty deeply, but I would just say that we're looking at those because of this pressure on us to be able to try to do something a little differently than losing that early season fertilizer. So the first part that I'm going to cover is going to be option number 2. The use of controlled release fertilizer. We've been doing a lot of work in this particular area, some of it small plot research over maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then as that research has become pretty consistent, we began to move a lot of this on-farm demonstrations to take a look at what's happening on those farm operations. So what are the considerations that the farmers are thinking about in terms of controlled release fertilizer? The first one is going to be some type of a bed replacement of that granular soluble fertilizer to try to ameliorate the early season leaching losses. And then it also helps to, if you go with a full season program, you have a lot less pressure on you for the fertigation program. Of course, cost is a major issue, a major consideration here. The convenience is highly attractive to the growers that are looking at a full season, especially the full season controlled release fertilizer replacement. And in those cases, it can really help on savings for labor, where you don't have as much concern about somebody going and turning valves. In a lot of our situations, we don't have a lot of automation among those farms, although that's coming. We have a lot of dependence on labor to be turning valves, turning them off, hoping they're not going to forget after lunch that they had left it on. It's supposed to be cut off after an hour, and it's actually been 6 hours, so forth and so on. You all know that story. So can we do some of these things that help us to reduce that early season nitrogen loss from leaching? So those are the considerations that they're going through in their mind. I would say that we already have several hundred, if not a couple thousand acres of controlled release fertilizer that are already implemented and adopted by growers throughout the state of Florida. In our particular area, in that Swanee Valley area, about a third of the watermelons in the state of Florida are grown in that area, and we're probably traditionally been in the few hundred acres, not the few thousand acres. But I think that we're continuing to see interest and progress towards this as one of the options for adoption. When we've done this work on farm, we've primarily worked with two companies, Harrell's and Purcell are the two companies that are the manufacturers that the products that we're evaluating. And these are large-scale on-farm trials. So we might take a 20-acre field that has two 10-acre zones, or a 40-acre field that has two 20-acre zones, and half of that field would be implemented with a controlled release fertilizer option, and the other half would be in comparison to what the grower traditionally has doing their sort of grower standards. So these are large-scale trials over the past few years. We have also impose some data collection in this area, where we have soil moisture sensors that we're installing. If the grower doesn't have soil moisture sensors, most of them do. In some cases, we have installed a deeper sensor, one that goes down 48 inches instead of 20 inches, and there's a lot to be learned in our deep sandy soils between 20 and 48 inches. So we have the soil moisture sensors, and then we also, in some cases, not on every case, but have been taking multi-depth soil samples, 0 to 12, 12 to 24, 24 to 36, and then analyzing that for nitrate, nitrogen. And I want to recognize Sidney Williams in the background here, that one of the technicians there, the main technician here in the last year, that's helped to get all of this done. And then we also supplement leaf tissue samples, both dry leaf tissue samples as well as petiole sap testing. The yield stuff that we've been doing is trying to come up with some way to get the actual yield from these large on-farm demonstration trials. And what we're doing is we're not making the decision on the harvesting in any of these cases. So we're going behind the cutting crews in some cases and taking individual weights on a small subsection that you see on the right-hand side here. That's what we were doing up until this year, and this year we had 7 farms, large-scale farms, and there was no way that we were going to have the manpower to be able to do that. So we ended up counting buses and getting an average net weight of each individual bus off of each side, and having to be there on the days of harvest. And interestingly enough, when we decided about a year ago that this is the way we were going to do this, thinking, well, 3 or 4 harvests on a farm, 7 farms, I think we can handle that. And then the market for us in that region was really, really good. And for the delay in the Georgia harvest was beneficial to us. So in many cases, instead of getting 3 or 4 harvests, those farms were getting 8 harvests, 9 harvests. So we had a lot more work to be done to keep up with it, but we were able to capture all of it. We also pulled leaf tissue samples from these fields weekly, and if you're not familiar with petiole sap testing, the little devices that you see there on the backside of this vehicle would be one where we pull the leaf samples just like you would if you were going to send it off for analysis. And then we take the petiole away from the leaf blade and use a garlic press and crush that, and we can get an immediate measurement of the nitrogen and potassium status in those fields right there and then. And actually over time, I've gained even more confidence in this particular method. We've been doing this for 20, 25 years. And there's 100 farms in our region that have this service provided to them by the county agents throughout that area. Not to lay that on you, John, but anyway, we've got a really good team of extension agents in our region. So just as a snapshot, this is one of many of the petiole sap testing situations, and just use this one as an example. The red line is the conventional fertilizer, the blue and the yellow are the conventional, are the controlled release fertilizer treatments in this particular field. And you can see that it tracks very well until you get to the end here, where perhaps a late season injection here would have been able to increase the conventional. But I use this to say that even if we're using a controlled release fertilizer, if we get to this point and it drops below this shaded area, that we can use that to trigger a late season fertigation event. And this would be the type of data that could be used by the farmer to say, hey, I needed another 20 pounds or 15 pounds, whatever it is, to be able to do that. But you can see that during the majority of the season, that the controlled release fertilizer release rate in both of these treatments was very similar to that of the conventional fertilizer, where there was constant injections that were going on. The other thing that we have is just reams and reams of soil moisture sensor data. The top part here is the soil water content. The bottom would be that VIC and looking at the electrical conductivity at the different depths. And I just kind of want to point out that this slide becomes very, very busy, but this is one of the farms and one of the best managed farms that had some automation in it. And this brown line is the bottom sensor on these deep sensors, 46-inch sensor. And then I've picked a couple of the other ones, not all of the other ones. So you can see that there's activity that's going on here as you get into fertigation events. And the trick is to try to make sure that we're not moving these deeper sensors when we are irrigating and pushing fertilizer. So the light blue straight line and the brown straight line are examples of a situation where this farmer did a super job of managing the irrigation and the nutrient management. This type of data can really help the farmer when it comes time to documenting that they're not losing fertilizer. So if you think about the use of these sensors, not just to manage, but to also help you to be able to document the fact that under a well-managed system that we're not losing any fertilizer, as long as we're doing a good job with the irrigation management. Just an example of one of the typical farm situations. It's not that we have blown out of the water the conventional yields, but it's very common under well-managed irrigation systems to have the controlled release fertilizer just a slight bit higher than the conventional fertilizer. And so in this case, there's two different CRF1 and CRF2. In this case, the CRF1 was the highest numerical yield. It's not a replicated trial, so I'm not saying that statistically that is the case, but it was a little bit higher than the conventional fertilizer program. However, the conventional or the controlled release fertilizer number 2, which has less coated material in it, was not as good. So the controlled release fertilizer number 1 is sort of where you got everything with a polymer coated material, and we do really, really well in those situations as long as we are doing a good job with irrigation management. This is just an example of how we have monitored the yields this past season with those 7 farms where we were on there every single harvest. This particular farm had 5 harvests, and if you look down on the bottom right-hand square there, the total yield is what you would be mostly interested in, and you can see that in this case they had the conventional fertilizer program on part of the field, a controlled release fertilizer program that only replaced the bed fertilizer, and then the rest of it fertigated. So that's the partial season CRF. And then the CRF full season is where we put the controlled release fertilizer in the bed with the intention that as the release rate occurs, it lasts the whole season. And that's the bottom number that you see there. So in this case, both of the controlled release fertilizer options outperform the conventional one. And this is the farm that I showed the soil moisture sensor data on, automation, really doing a good job on soil moisture sensors and not leaching any of that very expensive controlled release fertilizer. So this is sort of typical of what happens in a well-managed controlled release fertilizer program from an irrigation standpoint. It doesn't mean that controlled release fertilizer in its entirety is protected from over-irrigation, because it's not. Once the material in that coated fertilizer, once it releases out of that coating, it's the same vulnerability as if it was conventional fertilizer. So it's protected as long as it's not released, but once it's released, you can over-irrigate, and if you over-irrigate every day, you move every bit of that down as soon as it's released. So it's not foolproof in terms of over-irrigation or a significant rain event. This is the table for all of the 7 farms, and on the right-hand side, when you start looking at that comparison there, the 2 different materials, the Purcell fertilizer that was chosen to be used in this by Purcell released too early, and they're aware of this. It's an easy fix going into this coming year, whereas the Harold's fertilizer is the one that we had done more years of research. This is a self-serving comment, but the point is that when you got a lot of years of data from a research trial, it's a lot easier to know that that's going to work when you go onto the farms. And so Harold's had a lot more data knowing what materials needed to be implemented on those farms. But I'm very, very confident that that the materials that now we know, we've learned a lot more about what the timing and release should be from both of those companies. But you can kind of see here that in some cases the conventional worked better than the controlled release if the release curve was not correct and or if there was over irrigation. So I think in the end, what to me I learned out of this situation is that it was a fertilizer trial. It still is a fertilizer trial. But as much as anything, it was an irrigation demonstration that we were able to go out at the end of the season and review what happened over that entire season with each of the farmers. And you can see that where we lost efficiency is where the irrigation mistakes were made. And so this year, I'm going to try to dig in and focus and figure out a way that we can look even more intensely at the irrigation programs. So there was a lot of lessons learned in this particular trial or demonstration on these 7 farms. The take-home message for me would be, as the ones that I've got listed here, that we can equal or improve yields with controlled release fertilizer programs. And that there are a number of benefits that are offered to the farmer. Not every farmer has the same things that they're prioritizing, but there's a number of potential benefits that can go along with it to help try to neutralize that additional cost of the controlled release fertilizer. And the 2D here with the environmental stewardship, at some point, if we're losing a lot of that bed soluble fertilizer, we're going to have to do something different, and this is one of the options that might align with a particular producer's goals. We've learned a lot more about the release curves that are going to be necessary for watermelons in our sandy soils in North Florida. It may not be the same release curve exactly that would be used in the area where John is, but it might be similar. And then we've learned a lot about how to place the controlled release fertilizer, and also that regular routine leaf tissue sampling, sap testing can really be beneficial. But in the end, it's the soil moisture sensors that are really going to help us to be able to make this work. Without having a good irrigation program, it's not going to work. We were able to get funding for this particular component from the Department of Agriculture, Office of Ag Water Policy, and the Suwannee River Water Management District, the 2 that are really looking over our shoulder pretty intensely. And then just a quick review here of the other option and in terms of replacing this vulnerable bed fertilizer component. And this came from discussions with the Florida Watermelon Association, where I think the general gist of this would be that the additional expense of the controlled release fertilizer might not be an attractive solution for many of the growers. What else can we do? Well, the only other thing that we can do as a major shift would be an all-liquid type program. So putting the phosphorus and micronutrients in the bed and starting with 808 or 10010 from day one. And that's what the Watermelon Association asked me to do, and that's what I'm going to just real quickly give a review here. There's a number of different partners in this in terms of fertilizer companies, seed companies, the Waters Ag Lab in terms of the analysis of the materials, plastic mulch, so forth and so on. So there's a big industry support group for this as well. We decided to do 4 treatments. The first one is the conventional, what would be typical of a grower, 50 pounds of fertilizer, soluble fertilizer in the bed, a full season controlled release fertilizer option, a partial season controlled release fertilizer option, and then the final one, number 4, is the all liquid version of the fertilizer program. This is what our schedule would look like. So the middle column here for a transplant date around March 21, We began with 1.5 pounds per acre per day of nitrogen and potassium, and then that increases as you go up through the season to a maximum in the middle of the season here of around 2.5, and then it begins to back off as you get closer and into harvest. This right-hand column on this table is where we would have had either the conventional grower standard or a partial CRF in the bed, and that's taking care of us until we get to this week here, week number 5, and then week number 5 from that point on is the same as the all liquid program. So this is where we have a little setup here with a portable generator, and we have the ability to inject into each of those individual treatments 4 reps per treatment. Pretty labor intensive, pretty time consuming. We took leaf tissue samples, and just sort of a quick summary of this is there's not a whole lot of difference going on in any one of these 4 treatments. There's a little bit of difference in the case of the leaf tissue nitrogen on the first and the last day, so we were able to get significance, but all of them are really good numbers. So it didn't matter which of the 4 programs we were using, we were able to provide good information, good nutrient status especially for nitrogen and also for potassium during the majority of the season. In terms of our early yields, the parts that I've got highlighted here on the left-hand side in yellow, that's the early season yield. We had a heck of a first harvest in this particular trial, and the total yield also was quite respectable for our trials. And as you see there was no significant difference either in early or in total yield among these 4 different treatments. So it didn't really matter which one of those we were going to use. So in summary, for this trial, all of them performed really, really well. It didn't really matter. The key back to the statement from earlier is that this is with proper irrigation management. In our small plots, we can do a really good job of making sure that we're not over irrigating. So I think that helps us to be able to manage each one of these individual trials. So that sort of just give you an overview of the updates of what we're doing from a nutrient management standpoint. For us, it's all about nitrogen and all about irrigation management, I think. I know it's not as intense for those of you that are in Georgia and South Carolina. I'm not going to say, but it's coming, but it probably at some point is going to be coming in certain parts of your area. So thanks for the opportunity, John.
Does anybody have any questions?
I'll be around if there are questions you want to catch me out in the hallway. We've got a couple of posters out there for these 2 particular studies, and we also have one on some pretty new and exciting paper mulch work that we're doing as well. So thanks for the opportunity. I'll be here.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Bhavesh Dutta. He's going to be talking about the basics on our watermelon diseases, especially what we associate here in Georgia. So, Dr. Bhavesh, here you go, sir.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. So, today I'll be giving you some of the basics of watermelon diseases. So, while preparing for my talk, some of the inputs I received from our agents that we need to talk about some of the basics of watermelon diseases, how the symptoms look like, and what are the differentiation among some of the closed symptoms caused by closed diseases. So today I'll be talking about those, and then I'll also be talking about some of the outcomes of the important multi-location trial which we've been doing with different counties and different extension agents on Fusium wilt and on watermelon grafts. And then I'll also be touching base on anthracnose, and then powdery mildews and downy mildews. So I have a lot to talk, but I'll be giving you the major pointers. Okay, so start with seedling watermelon diseases. What are the important seedling diseases which we see? So especially in Florida and Georgia, we'll be transplanting very soon. Florida might have already been transplanted. So look for this symptom. So first disease which I'm going to talk about is rhizoctonia. Rhizoctonia causes damping off on the seedling. You'll see the pinching at the base of the stem right here. And then you will also, the one thing with rhizoctonia damping off that you will not see, you will not see any water soaking here. Rather, it will be dry pinching. You will not see anything. But in contrary to that, there's one more damping off. It's caused by pythium. It's called pythium damping off. And it can be a little severe. It also causes the same time you'll see this pinching at the base of the stem, but it will be associated with the water soaking. Okay, two different symptoms, but one is water soaking, another is not. Okay, seedling disease. Fusarium wilt can also be a seedling disease, so it can also be seed transmitted. So this is a particular seedling tray that came to our diagnostic clinic 4 or 5 years ago, and we let the flat there for next 2-3 days, and within 3 days the seedling started wilting. We ended up isolating Fusarium oxysporum nevium from this particular infected seedling. So you may also see Fusarium oxysporum nevium from watermelon seedlings. You can also see gummy stem blight. If you do not do a good job in maintaining the moisture regimes in your greenhouses, you will see gummy stem blight. This is what gummy stem blight seed spilling tray would look like, but if you look at a closer look, you'll see these marginal concentric half-centric shaped lesions. You may also see anthracnose. Anthracnose will give you mimic symptoms as of a bacterial disease or bacterial symptoms. You will see lesions, intervenal lesions, but if you take these lesions, look under the microscope, you will see anthracnose spores and propagules. Now you will also see bacteria, especially in spring. If it's cold and wet, you will see Pseudomonas. If it's a little warmer, you may see some Xanthomonas. But Xanthomonas is not a big deal for us, but Pseudomonas, especially in Florida, there's a good bit of work done on Pseudomonas and Pseudomonas in the seedlings, where they have seen Pseudomonas could cause a problem. But in Georgia, as we plant a little later, our transplants get ready around mid-February to mid-March, we see some symptoms, but this is kind of a cosmetic disease for us. The symptom goes away when we plant these seedlings in the field. But again, to be a good steward, a transplant outgrower should cull all these seedlings that has any of the symptoms which I showed in the last 4 or 5 slides. And also, it is also highly recommended that our growers, before planting, train the H2O workers that what seedlings to pick, what to throw. So if they see any of these symptoms, they need to discard those seedlings. Especially, you do not want any of the soil-borne pathogens to be transplanted in your field, because if it get transplanted, if it shows symptoms, it's going to stay there for longer. It will be very hard for you guys to get rid of those soil-borne ones. But foliar diseases, yes, you can. Okay, let's see the diseases in melons and under field conditions. Okay, you can see gummy. Gummy usually can appear any time of the growth period of a watermelon. In Georgia, we start seeing gummy around May, and then it gets severe later on if a good fungicide program is not being followed. Again, you will see these nice concentric rings. Under very severe conditions, you will see gummy ooze from the petioles. This is what I'm talking about, the gummy ooze on the petioles. And this is how the spores look like under the microscope. You will see bicelled conidia. So they have 2 cells in the conidia. This is quite diagnostic for gummy. Well, anthracnose. Anthracnose on melons is and anthracnose on a variety of cucurbits. So this is the symptom of anthracnose on melons. You will see nice lesions that can start as angular lesions, giving you a mimic of a downy or a bacterial spot. And then if it's unmanaged, not managed well, you can see symptoms on the fruits. You don't want anthracnose on fruits because it also has a post-harvest phase. It means if you pick an infected fruit and put it in the bin of a healthy fruits, it can infect the entire bin as like Phytophthora. So I would not advise to do that. The other thing with the anthracnose, you will see nice lesions on the stem and the petiole. This is anthracnose. This is downy. Do you see a difference? They're not. Very hard to see the difference visually unless you see the microscope. But there's a way to show a difference. This one. If you're confused, especially for the scouts and the growers, if you're confused, if you're looking at the downy or anthracnose, look at the petiole or the stem. Downy will never cause lesion on stem, whereas anthracnose would. So anthracnose will cause this kind of bleached out appearance. Sometimes can be water soaked, sometimes may have some sporulation associated with it, but you will see these lesions on stem, but downy won't. That's the one of the best diagnostic way to differentiate downy from anthracnose without using microscope. Okay? All right, I'm going to spend some time on anthracnose. This is a new grant we got funded from USDA, Especially Crop Research Initiative. We're going to look at the cucurbit anthracnose in the entire East Coast. So we have 7 different institutions around USDA working on this project. This is a $5 million project. Why this project is important? Last 3 or 4 years, we've been seeing an increasing trend of anthracnose across all cucurbits, particularly on a cantaloupe and cucumbers. Okay? This particular path anthracnose can also go on watermelon, but watermelon, the trend is increasing, but it's not as bad as cucumber anthracnose. Oh, sorry. So this is how the anthracnose pathogen would look like on the plate. It is caused by Colototricum species complex, particularly Colototricum orbiculare. And anthracnose, if you look under the microscope, if you take the lesion from this infected tissue, you'll see these hairy setae or spines. Okay, these are the, again, diagnostic features of anthracnose. Okay, so one thing which we did in the last 3-4 years, at least in the last 3 years, with the help of our agents, we sampled anthracnose outbreak fields from in 4 or 5 different counties. The samples were collected on cucumber, cantaloupe, melons, and so forth. The one thing which we saw, this is just a very preliminary data, but we showed that there's a genetic distinction between the anthracnose or Colototricum orbiculare isolated from cucumber and cantaloupe versus watermelon. So this distinction is giving us an indication that it could be the anthracnose could be host specialized, or there might be a race. Although we know there are races, but the race concept needs to be reevaluated again in this particular system. But to make a long story short, anthracnose in cucumber and cantaloupes are a little similar, whereas anthracnose in melons is a little different, although they are caused by the same genus and species, Colototricum orbiculare. This is all Colototricum orbiculare, but this is a little different than this. Now, what does it mean in terms of fungicide sensitivity? What we looked at in the last couple of 3-4 years, we're also seeing that the field failure of azoxystrobin to control anthracnose, particularly in cucumber and cantaloupe, not as bad as in watermelon. So it was quite evident in a small study when we looked at the EC50 values of those isolates that we collected from cucumber and cantaloupe and watermelons. What you're seeing here, watermelon isolates had a lower EC50 value for azoxystrobin. What does it mean? It means the watermelon isolates are still sensitive to azoxystrobin. So watermelon anthracnose is still sensitive. It means Quadris and other generics can work on anthracnose in melons. Whereas in cantaloupe and cucumber, we have seen high EC50 values indicating that might be they might be insensitive, or they might be less sensitive to this one, to Quadris and to Quadris. So we took it to the field and see, okay, how does these two distinctions in sensitivity of isolates from cantaloupe and cucumber versus watermelon mean in the field? So this is a fungicide trial we conducted on cucumbers. We looked at all fungicides which are labeled. There might be a couple which are not labeled on cucumber and anthracnose. So look at this list of fungicides like Proline Topsin, our top hitters. Luna Experience, Merivon, Merivis Prime, Aprovia Top, our moderately effective fungicides. Even Cabrio do have some juice left. Bravo also works. But look at Quadris. Quadris did not work on cucumber and anthracnose. And we knew with some of our lab studies that cucumber and anthracnose, there might be a situation of fungicide insensitivity. Okay, so and it's quite evident in this particular trial. What happens in watermelon anthracnose, it's a little different. Everything else worked as in a cucumber, but look at Quadris and Quadris Top. They still have some juice left in them. They're still effective on watermelon anthracnose. So when watermelon anthracnose, if you want to control watermelon anthracnose, Quadris and Quadris Top, I would prefer Quadris Top over Quadris but it is moderately effective. It's not a superstar, but still it's effective. So this shows how the biology of infection, how the fungicide sensitivity profile differs for a pathogen that with the same genus, same species, but have a distinction in their pathogens, fungicide sensitivity profiles. There's one set of data. So we wanted to see how better we can increase the efficacy of some of the top hitters. We looked at, for the last couple of years, we're trying to tank mix the top hitters with macrothiol sulfur. Macrothiol sulfur is a very small particle-sized sulfur that are macronized sulfurs. So we started tank mixing proline with the macrothiol sulfur, and we saw there's a boost in efficacy on anthracnose management. So look at proline, look at the disease here. But proline by itself is far better than non-treated check. But when we add a macrothiol sulfur to it, this is the second year of tank mixing macrothiol sulfur data, it was consistent. And other things that we did not see any phytotoxicity in this particular trial. The good thing with macrothiol sulfur, this sulfur also has an efficacy against a wide range of pathogens, but it is particularly good on powdery mildew. So if you're trying to control powdery mildew also, it also have a dual efficacy on powdery mildew too, powdery mildew and anthracnose. Proline by itself has a broad spectrum activity. It is effective against anthracnose, powdery, gummy, and so forth. If you apply proline in the soil, it will give you efficacy against fusarium. So these are our top fungicides. Okay, switching gears. Do you have any questions on anthracnose, fungicide sensitivity, trials, anything? I will be happy to answer before I switch gears to fusarium. Yes. In 2022, we did that. We used a tank mix in topsin and proline with a macrothiol sulfur, similar level of boost. Okay, but boost was much more pronounced in proline than in topsin, I would say. That's why this last year, 23, we just moved with topsin, with proline. Yes. Yes, if you look at the races, I think there's 9 to 12 races. Pumpkin falls within the race of pumpkin is closer to the race of cucumber and cantaloupe than melons, but it's different race. Okay, so in this particular project, we'll be reevaluating all the races in different cucurbit crops that we across the East Coast. So we'll have a better idea. But whenever we talk about race, there's a lot of confusion with the races. Okay, it seems. All right, I'll move on to fusarium wilt. This is a nemesis of watermelon, especially in southern Georgia. So we have so much of fusarium in southern Georgia that we are finding problem in rotating, growers are finding problem finding field to rotate with, particularly in the region where you have a crisp, Wilcox, that area, and also in Berrien County. So this is particularly bad disease. Once you have this pathogen in your field, you'll not able to get rid of it. So we have a situation where growers came after 15 years of fallowing his field. He again got hit with fusarium with the same intensity. I do not know how much crop rotation will work in this case. Okay, symptom-wise, so how do we diagnose fusarium? As the disease suggests, wilting. Wilting is the first appearance of a fusarium wilt. More likely you will see if there are a couple of vines or 3 vines, one vine will wilt, other 2 vines will be fine. So that was one telltale sign. If you want to go deeper, uproot the roots, you will see the healthy roots, but you need to cut the stem, you will see vascular discoloration. This is one of the most diagnostic feature of fusarium with vascular discoloration. Okay. Okay, these are the spores that produces. So it produces this macroconidia, which are cushion-shaped, boat-shaped. It also produces these small microconidia. It also has these chlamydospores. Chlamydospores are the resting spores. When the pathogen is very close to the end of the season, then it produces chlamydospores, and then it survives in the soil and waits for the next watermelon crop. Okay, last 3-4 years we've been working collaboratively with 5 different agents, county agents, and looking at the efficacy of Carolina strongback rootstocks. You know Carolina strongback rootstock is a commercial rootstock available by Trihistel, and it is tolerant to fusarium. We wanted to see how good Carolina strongback rootstock perform in our conditions and across different counties. So I'd like to first acknowledge our county agents. We have John Bennett here, we have Tucker Price here. Do we have Ben here? Ben Reeves? Whosoever contributed to this trial, I would like to acknowledge them. This is a very important trial. So this is a trial which I'm showing in 2022 we conducted, and we saw grafted versus non-grafted. So grafted, whenever I say grafted in this trial, it's Carolina strongback graft rootstock, and we use crackerjack as a sign. In this one, you can see, we did not see any disease in, this is in Berrien County, not a single disease, but in non-grafted one, we have a very less amount of, close to 25%. In Crisp County, we had more than 50% disease on non-grafted, but in grafted was less than 5%. This is again, similar trend in Wilcox County. We have a high disease in non-grafted versus grafted. Cook and Turner also had a similar trends, but there are similar trends, but they are not statistically different. Okay, now another thing, this data which I'm showing is based on visual wilting data. Okay, as a pathologist, we have to make sure what the wilting is eventually caused by Fusarium or not. The first thing which you would do is to cut the stem and look for vascular discoloration. So these bar graphs are actually the vascular discoloration of the wilted plants. What percentage of the plants were wilted that had a vascular discoloration? So we looked at the vascular discoloration across the plots, and we found Berrien County was great. Not a single plant had a vascular discoloration. Okay, Crisp County, we had close to 85% of vascular discoloration from non-grafted, whereas in grafted we got close to 30%. So you remember, Crisp County had less than 5% wilting, okay, but the vascular discoloration is 30%. What does it mean? The plants were infected, the plant did not show symptoms. So that shows these grafted plants are not resistant, but they're tolerant. They can tolerate the infection. Okay. Turner County, we had a more grafted plant, non-grafted infection, non-grafted plants compared to the grafted, and so forth. So this is the vascular discoloration. This shows the real infection in the plant, and this is a true litmus test. So what we did, we also confirmed those same stems in the lab with the isolation and confirmation by PCR that the symptoms we indeed see in the grafted in the field or the vascular discoloration, they actually were caused by Fusarium oxysporum niveum. Okay, that's a 2022 story. Come 2023, we expanded our work. In this time, we looked at some of the new citron rootstocks, and also we included some of the interspecific squash rootstock. We did this trial across different sites. Look at the Wilcox County, look at CSB rootstock. Not a single CSB, which is Carolina strongback, had any disease. Whereas the citron rootstocks, these are new rootstocks, they're not great, these rootstocks. Okay, in Berrien County, not a single disease on Carolina strongback rootstock. But look at non-grafted, we had close to 50%, citron 1 and citron 2, these citron lines, these are preliminary lines, they did not perform well. Well, in Cook County, we do have some level of infection in Carolina strongback, but it was significantly lower across when compared to other treatments. And also similar trends was in Crisp County. The one thing I'd like to bring to a notice, look at the squash rootstock, interspecific hybrid squash rootstock. Fusarium oxysporum niveum is actually non-host for this rootstock. So we were not sure why we were seeing the wilting symptoms in these. So when we looked at the vascular discoloration on these squash rootstocks, they were not vascular discolored. So it seems something else might have caused it, but not Fusarium oxysporum niveum. So we ended up isolating Fusarium from those, but they were not, and when we looked at the PCR, when we tested those isolates with the PCR assay, they were not Fusarium oxysporum niveum. There was some different random Fusarium that causing these things in this interspecific hybrid rootstocks on squash. So we'll be retesting these things again this year. So to make a long story short, Carolina strongback rootstock is tolerant. It is adaptive to our southern Georgia. And with respect to yield, I think Dr. Ted McAvoy, our horticulturist, he talks about the yield of this trial. I'm not going to talk about the yield here. So there's a lot of work needs to be done in terms of what is the optimum spacing we need for our conditions, what is the optimum fertilization, what is the optimum irrigation practices we need for Carolina strongback. But good thing is that we have an option against Fusarium. The other bad thing is that economics. In some cases, economics may not work. But think of a situation, if what I think that we need to come up with a risk index. If a grower doesn't have any field, any choice, but he wants to grow melon in his heavily infested Fusarium soil, what he would choose? He would choose Colonel Strongback. But those growers who know that he does have less level of infection of Fusarium, or he can go by with using Mirvis Prime and Proline and rely on other things, then he has to make a decision whether he should go for Colonel Strongback or not. If I were a grower, I would not. If I know I have a very heavily infested soil, only in those cases I would rely on Colonel Strongback rootstock. But again, there's a lot of work needs to be done, a lot of things need to be unopened. So anyway, any questions on Fusarium before I move to other couple of diseases, and then I'll shut up. Okay. All right. Powdery mildew. Powdery mildew in squash and melons and everything, it's widespread. It's not a big disease, but we usually see powdery mildew right after fruit set. If you do not do a good job in controlling powdery mildew, it can bite. So this is an example of a trial which we conducted in 2023. We looked at the individual efficacy of different products. Consistently, we have seen Vivandon-Gatton to be our top performance, Vivandon-Gatton, followed by Prolivo. So against powdery mildew. Torac, how many of you heard about Torac? Torac is actually insecticide against thrips, but it also has a powdery mildew efficacy. So if you spray some Torac, happen to spray Torac in your crop against the viruses, you can against thrips, it will also give you efficacy. Luna products, particularly Luna Flex, also has an efficacy. So based on our 4 or 5 years of trial, we usually rank these powdery products. You can see Vivandon-Gatton are high to moderately effective on powdery mildew. Prolivo is moderate. Luna products, all the premixes of Lunas like Tranquility, Luna Experience, and Luna Flex, they're moderate against powdery mildew. Proline, excellent fungicide, broad spectrum fungicide. It also had a good level of efficacy against powdery mildew. Mirvis Prime Approbia Top, if you spray Mirvis Prime Approbia Top for anthracnose and gummy, it will also have a spectrum. Powdery mildew comes under its spectrum too. Quintec, which used to be our top powdery product 5, 6 years ago, it's losing its juice. It's not as effective as it used to be. Downy mildew, I'm not showing you the data, but I'm showing you the ranking based on my trials. Orandis premixes, if you use Orandis Ultra, Orandis Opti, or Orandis Gold, particularly Orandis Opti and Ultra, they are high to moderately effective on downy. Illumine is moderately effective. Ranman still is effective. Purgar Flex is moderately effective. Now, one more thing, Presidio. Presidio is also effective on downy, but only on watermelon downy. You will not see much efficacy on other cucurbit downies. If you want to spray Presidio in melons, Presidio is mainly sprayed only for Phytophthora in melons. It also have a spectrum on downy. So if I were a grower, I have to spray something on downy for Phytophthora, I would use Presidio to start with. Bravo by itself is also effective on downy, but it's not great product solo. But if you tank mix or if you rotate with Bravo, some of the heavy hitters, you will get a good efficacy. Phosphites are the most systemic fungicide you would ever see, which is ambimobile, means it can go up and down. You spray phosphite in any of it doesn't matter how good is your coverage of a spray, it will go to everywhere. Phosphites, you can also think of rotating your product with. Okay, but you have to be a little careful with phosphite is that since it's highly systemic, in some cases under stressful condition, you may see some phyto, but it's rare in cucurbits. Okay, this is the watermelon spray program. This spray program has been designed by me and Dr. David Langston together. So this is what we recommend for our watermelon growers in Georgia. Early spring, start with Bravo. You don't have to go with the heavy hitters. You do a Proline and Mirvis Prime for Fusarium wilt, and then for foliar, you go with Bravo. Once you have a flower or a head set, then a fruit set, then you go with Mirvis Prime, Luna Experience, Approbia Top, whatever you want. Okay, then you have then following it with the Inspire Super and Proline, and so forth. But you also need to add the downy and Phytophthora spray right here, right at fruit set. Okay? In later plantings, let's say in fall, if you are brave, grow watermelon in fall in Georgia. Okay? So you have to start early on with the heavy hitters. So you can go with the one shot of Bravo, but rotate with the Bravo and Teb and tebuconazole, and then you have to have your Downy and Phytophthora spray right away, especially Downy spray. You have to, within 2 weeks, you have to have a Downy spray. Otherwise, your seedling or your plant will not even make vine in southern Georgia. So, and then you'll have to rely on these heavy hitters. So there is a difference if you grow melons in spring versus melon in fall, and the fungicide programs you have to choose. So, well, I think this is my last slide. With this, I'd like to conclude my talk. And I'd be glad to get any question. Yes, Jamie.
What's the theory behind adding tebuconazole there on those first 4 sprays in the fall?
What is the reasoning behind it?
Right.
So tebuconazole still has some juice left on anthracnose. Okay, it is our gummy is already resistant to tebuconazole. It's not going to do anything on gummy, but right this time we'll see more anthracnose than gummy and downies. So that's the reasoning we're adding Teb there. And if you are in northern United States, you get gummy also, where they do not have a resistance to tebuconazole. So it has a broader spectrum in northern, like in Virginia. Questions? Any more? If not, I'll be in the hallway. You can find me, or you have my email address. I'll be happy to discuss. So thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Can I have attention? So there's one notice, one announcement here. We have our distinguished vegetable pathologist, distinguished professor and vegetable pathologist here. We recently hired, and she just started a couple of weeks ago. Her name is Dr. Myung Tian. She's here. She'll be our new Phytophthora capsicum lady. She'll be the one who will be solving the problem. But anyway, she'll be doing a lot of fundamental research on Phytophthora capsicum and melons. So I would like you all to connect with her and give her good luck with this thing. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our final speaker will be Dr. McAvoy. He's going to go over the research that he's been doing since he started with the university, I assume. So I'm going to give him the floor, and we'll get going.
Thank you. So in the final talk today in the watermelon session, I'm going to talk about the yield aspect of grafted plants, number of fruit, fruit weight, average fruit weight, as well as large seedless watermelon variety trial with yield and quality, as well as mini watermelon yield and quality. So starting out with grafting, Bhabesh has already showed you the efficacy against fusarium wilt. And so these are actually his trials in a field we were able to inoculate. And as you could tell, the spacing is very close. So this was an inoculated field with 1 foot spacing, just looking at the wilt. But we went ahead and took yield as well. So in this scenario where you have heavy fusarium pressure, you're getting more yield for weight per plot than a non-grafted. You're getting more counts per plot in the grafted versus the non-grafted. Now in this one we had the same fruit size statistically, but you're just looking at 14 versus 14 something, so it's doesn't matter, and it's probably based on the plant spacing, I suspect, based on what I'm going to show you in a second. So then these were some of the off-site grower fields that Bhabesh was mentioning. This is in Berrien County. And this was normal spacing under moderate pressure. So again, you can see more weight numerically, but not statistically, in the grafted versus the non-grafted, probably due to the fact that the fusarium wasn't as high, but still you were seeing an increase in yield numerically. Same thing with the count. But here we were seeing a bigger fruit size in the grafted versus the non-grafted at normal spacing. So I'm not going to present this data, but this has spurred us to go further with spacing trials because of the economics where the grafted plants are more expensive, and we want to see, can we reduce our plant population? We did it on site at 4, 5, 6, and 7 feet between plants on 6-foot centers, and there was no difference in spacing on yield. So that indicates to me you can go higher on spacing. But what we were also seeing is, in that scenario, all the melons are bigger than normal. So we're actually going to repeat that, and we're going to go less, which might not be what you want to do from an economic standpoint, but it'll give you the answer on both the yield and fruit size and the economics. This is just a conclusion from the grafting, was that high fusarium pressure and tighter spacing, we were getting more fruit number and weight. And under normal spacing, we were getting bigger fruit size with the grafted plants. So now getting into our seedless large melons. So this is a variety trial. I've done them 2 years in a row since I've been at UGA. Last year, the top performers got put into this trial, and then I also added some new entries. As you know, you may know, this year we had a lot of cool and rain, wet May, delayed pollination and fruit set, and then we got a ton of rain right before rain. So we had a lot of defoliation, things of that nature. So we had sunburn. So we did see differences in sunburn. I have highlighted in green the varieties that had less sunburn. The Excursion, 2487 and 7197. And the ones with the stars are the ones I'm going to highlight because those are going to be my recommendations. But you could also see there's more material that did well against sunburn. As far as there was no difference in count per plot, but there was difference in weight. So everything in green that has an A was similar. So you could see, it's probably hard for me to tell you grow this one variety. There's a lot of good varieties out there that will perform similarly in total weight, but we were getting differences in fruit size. So the yellow here are probably bigger. That'd be your 30, 36 counts, and the bigger varieties that have high yields are Excursion and Sierra Nevada. And as we'll see later, the Excursion is light colored and rind, and the Sierra Nevada is dark color rind. Then in the green here, that match up with the Bs significantly, would be more your 45 count. And so for those ones, I'm recommending 2487, Essence, Guardsman, Cracker Jack, and El Capitan, as well as, 7197. The orange, I would say you're still probably fine, but I would want to tend to lean towards bigger melons just in case you're not making size, and that's why I highlighted them. But the red are definitely, in my opinion, too small and would not work for Georgia. So this example of what I was telling you about sunburn, with the sunburn, I definitely think there's a component of keeping your vine strong. We're seeing more after the first pick where you're stomping on the vines. Last year when I did the black melons, it seemed like those dark melons were getting more sunburn. And then I've also seen some of the shape where it seems like maybe a rounder shape that's sticking out of the canopy in general, maybe not in all cases, again, is more exposed to sunburn. So like I said, there were differences in varieties, and those are some of my theories. Okay, so remember, these were the two that were your biggest melons, Excursion and Sierra Nevada. Excursion has performed well 2 years in a row, and it's an old standby. But I believe the Sierra Nevada is in that same class, and it's a darker melon. So these are two you've probably never heard of, and they did well, as you saw in the total yield, as well as being in that 45 count category. The one on the left is 2487, and as you can see, that's a medium colored, solid rind. Maybe if you get close, it's got a little netting. So that's, in my opinion, interesting, and it's different. On the right, we have Essence. And again, that's nice and dark, and you could probably tell from this picture, it's round. So everything else was more oval shape. And I don't know if there's a consumer preference, but again, in a market where everything might be indistinguishable from each other, it's got a little difference, and it yielded well. And then I got one more after this, so bear with me. The next two I'd like to highlight are Guardsman and Cracker Jack, and they did well. Statistically, the highest among what the others I'm highlighting. Cracker Jack seems like it's seeming to be the new hotness. That's the majority of growers are growing, and I think this validates my results that the Cracker Jack did good in my trial. Guardsman as well. That one did well. So I think there's less of a stronghold, and there's a lot of companies that are producing good varieties. And lastly, the El Capitan and the 7197. Again, one dark and one light. And I'll summarize the rind color, flesh color, hollow heart now. Okay, so this is more characteristics. So this is not necessary. I do have, I don't have red, so I have green and yellow to highlight differences. But it's more just to numerically categorize rind color, shape, stripe, and flesh color. And so you can see the rubric that I had on the right. So this was, basically what you see a descriptor in a seed magazine, except I quantified it with numbers, and there was, an objective way to look at it. So you can see with the rind color, 3 is dark, and I have highlighted that the dark colored rinds. And then I have medium color, which was that solid, which is the 2487, and then several light color rinds. And you can see again the stars of the ones that I recommend. So you can see how, just to characterize them. Shape, as I mentioned, we had oval, which is typical, and round. As I mentioned, that we did have a couple round shapes, and the Essence is the one that also did well in yields. Striping, basically had the crimson stripe. We had the solid, as I showed you, and then as I'll show you later, there was a tiger stripe, as I called it, and that was unique. It probably didn't do too well in our trials, but all the students took that one home because it looked cool. And then flesh color, I have dark red, light red, and yellow. So there was one yellow variety in the trial. All right, so this, I do have red and yellow. So there's, some of these are negative, definitely. So seed color, we were getting some dark seed. So again, I had 3 as being the higher the number, the better, in seed color and hollow heart. In seed color and soluble solid content. As you can see, the 2487 had nice white seed, no problems. El Capitan in dark green. Again, anything in light green is still significantly similar to the dark greens. So you can see there. Essence might be a caution. Again, it's got an A, but it also it matches with the best and it matches with the worst. So that might be a caution. Same thing with Guardsman. But at this point, I wouldn't give it a red unless it does separate from the top performers, from the A's and the ABs. We did see hollow heart. We didn't have a robust screening. Basically, we were lugging the fruit from the field back to the packing, to our to our metal structure. And so with the bins and everything, we only took 3 fruit out of the field per plot to cut. So basically with hollow heart, it's number of fruit that we cut that had a hollow heart. So it's a number out of 3. If it had 3, all the fruit had hollow heart. If it had 0, none of the fruit had hollow heart out of 3. You can see there was one excellent that had none. However, it didn't have good yield. But everything else that's in this lighter green was similar and did well in hollow heart. And then there was no difference in statistically with soluble solids. But if you want to pick out your 13s in there, they might be a little sweeter. So this is my summary on the large watermelons. The 2487, that was medium color, the solid rind pattern, and less sunburn. The 7197, light color and less sunburn. Then I had 3 in a row, Essence, Guardsman, and Cracker Jack, that had dark stripe, dark flesh, and the Essence is different in that it was round instead of oval. And then that's what these 3 are basically the same category, and this one similar except different shape. And then the large size Excursion and Sierra Nevada, one is light with less sunburn, and one is dark rind. All right, so mini seedless watermelons, same thing. I did this 2 years ago. The best performers got put in this year's trial, and I also added some new entries. So we had no difference in sunburn here, number of count, but we did have difference in weight. So the 3 top ones had the highest weight. They also seem to be, on average, slightly higher on fruit size. Now, they're still mini watermelons. They're not big watermelons, but I think that a little bit of fruit size helped with the yield here. So the ones I want to highlight are the ones with the stars again, Altata, Excite, and Queenlet. And we're going to look at the characterization and fruit quality again here. So no difference in rind color. Stripe, we had different stripes, crimson, tiger, and solid. 3 is crimson, 2 is tiger, and 1 is solid. And then differences in flesh color, with the green being dark red, and then we got some light red in there as well. Again, keep track of the ones that are highlighted. The Queenlet in particular was one that is solid color, or solid stripe. You know, I just want to, this Excite would probably be my top for, we'll see for various reasons, but keep track of that as far as the for 2 years in a row, as far as the stripe varieties with the crimson stripe. And then the Queenlet, I think, is a different category, having the solid stripe color. And this is why, going into the quality, as you can see, Excite across the board doesn't have hollow heart, 0 incidence, has predominantly white seed, and has among the highest sugars. The Altata was one of our top yielders. Maybe a little caution on the hollow heart, again, matching with the best and the worst. But it did do a little worse on sugar, statistically. And then the Queenlet did good on hollow heart and seed color, and kind of in the middle as far as eating quality. But then it's also quite unique. And this is what that one looks like with the solid rind pattern. And this is examples of the tiger stripe, the yellow flesh, and some of the hollow heart and hard seed that we were seeing. So this is what we were looking at. So my recommendations for the minis would be Excite. Altata did well, but might run into eating quality, if that's important. And then the queenlet was a top performer for the solid stripe, or no stripe, I should say. And this concludes my talk, and I just wanted to thank everyone that contributed. Triest Ag, who provided all the grafted plants, the Carolina Strongback, and they do the grafting and provide the plants, as well as all the seed companies and your in-kind contributions and seed donations that made this research possible. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, what's your views on your pollination on the mini and the large seedless? What variety and what was your ratio?
I use SB7 on everything. I'll stand next to Mike. I use SB7 on everything, and I did every third plant. Yes, ma'am.
I want you, on your Cracker Jack and Guardsman, did you know, what was the bricks on those?
You know, I didn't take note. I think there was no difference. That's why I didn't highlight it. But I could go back to that slide if you want to look at it.
Yes, I was just wondering if there was a major difference in the bricks and those, the ones that you recommend, which ones had the higher bricks?
So the higher number is better. I mean, you can see the numbers. My statistics is telling me that with variation and everything, there's not a significant difference in my trial. But you want to look at Guardsman and Cracker Jack, go ahead. Look like Cracker Jack was among the highest. I had 13.8. Guardsman, 12.4, so there you go.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Dr. McAvoy.
Thank you.
Well, that will conclude the watermelon session. We appreciate your time.